The humanist being
presents
When Humanists Attack.
Audrey Hepburn sits down in the Chinese restaurant, diamonds in her hair. Waiters are levitating backwards, orders ready, music in the air. I finish my soup, she sips her soda, twinkle in her eye. A waiter is vacuuming my Toyota, life is easy, you don't have to try. Scooby-Doo sleeping in a tent, always at the park 'cause he didn't pay the rent. You go there too, you're living in his tent. Dogs are in the park, but you haven't seen them yet. Then one by one, they're lying in the sun. What's the implication when your working days are done? Days go by, there's gotta be a story. Still living in the park with a big Tory. What's the implication? Dogs jumping up and down in the sunrise. What's the implication? Dogs jumping up and down in the sunrise.
Implication Dogs by the Preoccupied Pipers. Vocal by Barbara West, and she's our guest this time round on When Humanists Attack. My name is Roger Kimmel Smith, and I'm ecstatic to be able to bring to your ears the conversation Barbara and I had a while back, in which she unspooled quite a lot of her life narrative. Barbara is a poet, a dynamic performer, as you can hear, with a spoken word style that's been called simultaneously stand-up comic and stand-up meditation. Her book of poetry and prose is called And I Felt the Simple Sweetness of Me, pub date 2017, Cold River Press. Barbara has made her living as a nurse for many years. She's done midwifery, she's done hospice care, she's done ER and wound ostomy care. She's raised a healthy child as a single mother, and she's simply one of the most brilliant and captivating human beings I've had the good fortune to know on this earth. So, with Vododio and Scooby-Doo, welcome Barbara to When Humanists Attack.
Woo! I'm so thrilled to be here. I just can't tell you how happy that show title makes me.
Really? Tell me about that.
Well, and I guess it actually has to do with some of the things I was thinking of reading today. We're all trying to be good and nice and, like, for example, not harm other people or not attack other people. But so to have a show that's titled When Humanists Attack, I just can't tell you what a relief that is to me, because
I see. It's the transgressive element that relieves you.
Well, it's already making room for me to make a lot of mistakes here. And I need that room.
Well, so I want to know everything about you, and from the beginning of your life. I'd like to start with your birth, if you don't mind. Where were you born? What do you know about your mother's gave birth day?
Well, I'll just go back. I am the product of a 300-year plus pacifist Anabaptist tradition. And so I think that's why the title When Humanists Attack is particularly freeing for me, because we've been trying to be pacifists for at least 300 years and we're not always the greatest at it.
Were you also trying to be humanist?
Well, we were trying to believe that people are good, and we were trying to support people in being their best selves and not attack them. And that's really hard to do, it turns out.
What specifically is this strain?
This is Church of the Brethren.
I see.
This is, both of my grandfathers were ministers in this church. My aunt and uncle are still ministers in this church. And but I was never baptized. We never lived in a Brethren town. And I was actually trying to arrange to be baptized at age 13 or 14.
Oh, really?
But there happened to be a sign on the wall of a youth room that I happened to visit that said, Jesus is the only way. And I was like, not going to be able to join that. even if it's just somebody accidentally left a sign on the wall. So that was the end of that.
Just because a multiplicity of ways you already knew.
Yeah, I just happened to know that there were at least a couple other ways, and I was wanting to join this one, but then I realized, those other ways that I knew weren't busy saying they were the only way, and so I couldn't join up with a way that was saying it was the only way, even if it's just a sign that some wacko happened to post on the youth room wall. And I was like, Mom, I can't join this church. And she said, well, some wacko conservative just put that on the wall, but we don't really think that. I'm like, yeah, but everybody else let the sign stay up on the wall. So,
ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was both sides of your family.
Yeah, both sides of my family. I'm pure blood. I mean, all four of my grandparents spent their lives working for peace and like for the good of humanity.
I see.
And that's basically what my mother and father ended up doing in their own ways. And it's basically what I'm trying to do, but I have kind of given up on the large scale. Not that I'm not still trying to vote the right direction or send some money the right way or support friends like you who are doing actual activist work, but the large scale work is such a challenge that I'm working on personal scale first. And first may mean this lifetime and the next lifetime, if we believe in lifetimes, which don't necessarily do, but I like the idea because it gives me some slack. I'm looking for slack. I guess that's the theme here of both my appreciations so far today.
And they're very cogent. So one thing I also know about your youth is that you moved around an awful lot. I mean, did you sort of feel like Indiana was the main place you lived?
Well, yeah. So that's the thing. I was born in Boston, and just to get back to my birth, my mother credits the natural childbirth class she ended up in and preparing as a 21-year-old preparing for my birth, and then her fight to have some autonomy during the birth process and then to nurse me later on was how she became a feminist, so I take some credit for that. But yeah, I was born in Boston. I grew up in Indiana, and then I moved here to Davis, California when I was in high school. And it's funny how California adopts you quickly, but yet, they say where you lived until you were the age of 5 kind of claims you in a certain way. And I certainly feel that. My sister and I were able to visit Bloomington, Indiana and Indianapolis, where we grew up last October. And it was a very important, intense experience for us. This thing I've heard about being imprinted by age 5 is the landscape itself imprints on you. And we were just like practically in tears, just like walking around, looking at trees, the certain kinds of trees, the certain places, the way the trees had grown in this one park, walking through the woods. It was just like food for us,
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other hand, it was an interesting thing for me and my sister. Even though we're 2 years apart, my therapist, diagnosed us as undifferentiated twins because we did move around a lot as children, and actually I took a year off from school and she skipped a year, so we actually graduated from college the same weekend, so we kind of almost became the same age. And
oh wow.
And my sister seems much more mature than me now, and it's funny, she actually has gray hair and my hair is not quite as gray, so people think she's older than me now, and that was always her dream as a little sister to catch up, and I think she did, and she did pass me. But the interesting thing is that apparently our memory is highly specialized. We have a few overlapping memories, but most of our memories from our childhood are completely different. So like she remembered geographically where everything was in the town, but I could remember the names of who lived there, or she could walk to our daycare, the block, but then when she got there, didn't recognize the building, but I could recognize the slope of the backyard and the way the front door opened. So it's as if we delegated parts of our memory. And a friend, actually, Jed Bell, who says to say hello to you, by the way, and it's in one of these stories that I might read later.
Jed.
Jed said, well, yes, certainly there was efficiency in delegating different parts of our memories, so one was in charge of a certain kind of memory and one the other. But Jed said also there was perhaps safety. The fact that neither of us had the whole memory kept us safe from some of the pain that was there. So we walked around and cried a lot.
Goodness me. All right. Well, so I mean, what should
Yeah.
we know about your adolescence by that time you were in Davis, California?
Yeah, well, the last part of it, I guess, I turned 16 this summer and we moved out here, and California has a way of adopting you. I mean, it's within a year we felt like we were from California, even though we still had this longing to go back to Indiana. And then it turns out, this is where I've settled. I raised my son here, and I lived in one town here for 24 years mostly until right now. And that is just so bizarre because other than being in grad school, I'd never lived in one town more than 2 years continuously. And a lot of that time was joint custody time between parents. So it is bizarre to think that I've been in this house. I've been in this actual house since 2001. And that's shocking to me. And there's something to be said for it. I recommend it, and for my son, having grown up with people that knew him as a baby and getting to see people grow up. I actually had never seen boys go through puberty. I mean, I'd known boys, like in elementary school and junior high, but then I went to 3 different high schools. And so when my son and his friends were growing up, it was just amazing to watch the physical things of boys going through puberty. I never had seen that because I had moved so much.
Well, and I guess the only long-term relationships you would have been with your nuclear family. So,
Yeah, and I had cousins, but we only saw them every few years, pretty distant. So it's just, and it's just interesting.
It's another dimension of why you're so close with your sister, I assume.
Exactly, and it's just so interesting having some of the same neighbors for the past 25 years and just kind of knowing people through thick and thin. I'm not good at long-term relationships, whether they're romantic or familial or personal in any way. Although, Roger, we've been friends for a very long time, so I'm grateful for that.
It's true.
We're over 30 years now, so that's awesome, and that's very rare for me.
Okay.
And so it's just been awesome.
Special for anyone.
I guess so. But having neighbors here, that I've known for so long, and we haven't always been on good terms, but we just still know each other, and that's a really amazing gift. It wasn't anything I expected.
It is. So for listeners, Barbara and I met in college. I believe for me, it was the day that I arrived at college. And, a few things that I remember from your college years, aside from doing a pair of duets together in a production of The Fantastics, it was some trouble with your father. Early on, like right away.
Yeah.
Then later you coming out as bi.
Yeah.
And then that you started out unclear about your career interests, like me, sort of literature type undecideds.
Yeah.
But toward the end, you announced you had a chosen vocation, and I felt very proud of you. You wanted to be a midwife. And then
which I never actually did, but at least I chose that.
Yes, and you went into Yale's program for nurse midwifery. What are you remembering?
I'm just kind of trying to do some math, which is not my forte, but we've known each other like almost 36 years now, like 35 and a half years. That's really cool. Mm-hmm. But yes, I particularly remember you and your sense of pitch helping me learn my part in The Fantastics, without which I would not have been able to perform those duets. So I'm still eternally grateful. And I keep wishing that my current girlfriend had that level of patience with me hitting wrong notes and then very gently and kindly correcting me over and over, which
she should know. It's a great bonding technique.
It is.
I mean, the feelings of being that age and in that place also had, its imprint, not so much geographical, but because of the bizarre placement of all of these people our age.
Well, it was just such a relief to arrive there, to be surrounded by people who loved learning. It was just so nice to not be humiliated for that anymore. Mm-hmm. I mean, later on, I took classes at, public university just in between during my year off in college. And when somebody raised their hand in class, the only question they asked was, is this going to be on the test? And it hurt me, and so, being together with you in college, there was a sense of common purpose that we were all helping each other learn. And that's such a gift. And I haven't been in that environment that many other times in my life. I actually feel it now in the little Mennonite fellowship I'm going to up in Corvallis. But I have mistakenly applied that in many other parts of my life, assuming we were all trying to learn together. And that was a mistake. And I've offended a lot of people and paid some heavy prices for making that wrong assumption in many other environments.
How sad, It seems like a very, good, positive, humanistic approach to whatever community one is in, certainly good-hearted.
Yeah. And certainly I have been in some environments where that was true. I mean, there's certain parts of my hospice work where there really was a sense of we're all trying to learn together. And, there have been pockets of it here and there, but I have mistakenly assumed that much more broadly than I should have.
Well, so how did it come about that you decided this was your next step, the nurse midwife thing, and what happened after that?
Well, I was very interested in psychology, and I was thinking about psychology or psychiatry until I took intro psych, and it was all about abnormal psych. And I was just interested in the ordinary screwed up people that we are. And that's who I wanted to learn about. So I studied literature because there was a lot of information about us in there, it seemed to me.
Right. That's the humanistic strain in psychology, but it's not as well developed as the social science strain.
Mm-hmm. And then I ended up being pre-med. And that was funny because I was always afraid of hospitals, but I had an infant cousin who was very sick and had surgery during the Christmas of my sophomore year. And we spent a lot of that Christmas in the UCSF Children's Hospital. And I was just so inspired by the people there and the care he got and singing Christmas carols in the hallway that I decided I could go to med school and become a doctor. So that was my path until I took that year off and went to Kentucky, and I got to work alongside obstetricians and midwives. And I saw, kind of similar to the psychology issue, that the obstetricians were only dealing with the abnormal, and that normal birth was what the midwives and nurses were doing, helping women have babies. Doctors weren't given the time to be with women. And that's what midwife means, is with woman. And that was what I wanted to do. So yes. That's how I ended up there.
Right. I mean, I remember when my child was born, we were trying to have midwife support, and they worked with one doctor who we ended up having to deal with extensively, but he wasn't used to dealing with people extensively. I thought of him as, like the closer relief pitcher.
Well, exactly. And I appreciate those doctors who are willing to support midwives. And during that time in Kentucky, it was the Frontier Nursing Service. I struggled with that because there was a need for obstetricians who would play that supportive role for midwives. And I really felt compelled to go ahead and do that. I knew I could do that, but it wasn't how I wanted to spend my time. I wanted to be in the game all along and not just the closer. And so even though I'm so grateful to those men and women who are willing to play that role, it wasn't what I wanted to do.
I mean, is this about the distinction between nurse midwives and lay midwives? I mean,
well, that's kind of another, kind of further parallel on the whole thing. I mean, I had thought my training as a nurse midwife would be relevant to a home birth practice. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't very much. I ended up doing a home birth apprenticeship during my last semester or two of my nurse midwifery training. And the training I got from the home birth midwives was the training I was really wanting. And not that I don't appreciate all that I learned during my nurse midwifery training, the main thing of which being learning the power of institutions and how futile it is to be an individual trying to go against them. And that's a real important lesson that I'm very slow at learning. But
right. Well, I mean, institutions aren't in favor of what was it at the beginning? Peace, any, or any of the related values, it seems.
Institutions are in favor of continuing to exist, is
like organisms.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And I'm particularly not skilled at interfacing with them. but what I learned from the home birth midwives was exactly what I had wanted to learn. And I got to do a wonderful year's apprenticeship with them afterwards. And then I came to California expecting to continue that, but ended up, again, having difficult relationships with midwives out here. It was a very different scene because the midwives in California had been actively persecuted by the California Medical Association, like taken away in handcuffs, like having their children threatened to put in foster care and stuff. And so,
Oh, I see. This was recent history.
well, it was 1994.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Connecticut home birth scene that I trained in was completely underground. It was so small that there was no backlash, and so we were very free with what we did. And we weren't transporting women to the hospital at the drop of a dime, and so the California scene was, what's that word when you're like entrenched or embattled,
Yeah.
And and there weren't very many midwives who had much longevity. The burnout rate was so high. And then the relationship that I was in fell apart, and I wanted to have my own kid, and I knew I couldn't be a home birth midwife and be an only parent at the same time. So I found a great midwife who had tons of experience, and I had a great home birth myself, and that was the result of my midwifery training.
Hey, well, right. Well, it sounds like a high price to pay, but a good thing to receive for that payment.
Exactly.
There must be some relationship, between you having, taken this career direction into birth and your decision that you wanted to become a single parent.
Well, yeah, I had just assumed I would have a child as part of a relationship, and I was in a lesbian relationship at that time, and we were looking for a sperm donor, but then the relationship ended. And the real important thing that I learned during my midwifery training, especially the nurse midwifery part of it, is how unprepared most people are to have children. And so I think most upper class, well-educated white women in their late 20s would think, oh, I'm not yet ready to have a child, financially or emotionally or relationship wise. But having seen who was actually having children for those previous 3 or 4 years, I realized I was in at least as good a shape on all those counts as most people. So I went ahead and did it. And that was probably the best decision I made in my life. It
was certainly a courageous one.
It didn't feel that way. It didn't feel courageous, really. It just, it was just what I most wanted to do. And I was very afraid of infertility. I had not ever had regular periods. I had rarely had fertile periods. And I knew so many women in their late 30s and 40s who were dealing with heartbreaking fertility issues. And so I was partly out of fear. I mean, I just figured at 28 was my best shot to get pregnant if I ever was going to be able to. And so I wanted to try then.
Yeah. Go through the exercise.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, so you and I were in correspondence for most of our 20s, not so much through direct letters, although I think we spoke on the phone, but we also wrote for a zine together. Were you doing other writing in your 20s? Were you in writing groups or
no?
What was your writing life like then?
Yeah, looking back on that, I mean, I really see collection that experience writing for that zine that you invited me to and supported me in so much. That was the first prose writing I ever did on a consistent basis, other than, assignments in college.
Huh.
And I remember, in the midst of that, when it was all going so well, we'd be so excited to mail off our, manual typewriter written things or handwritten things.
It's such a remarkable analog throwback,
mail them off to the person who was going to Xerox them and mail them back out.
I still have mine,
Yeah, me too. But I started thinking, someday maybe I would want to write a newspaper column or something. And I realized I have things to say that don't fit in poems. And that was such a treat, especially, and the dialogue, I mean, we had some things to say on our own, but mostly we were responding to what each other had said. And that was thrilling.
But what you're saying underneath is that you were writing poetry.
Yeah, I was always writing since I was 6 years old. I've been writing poetry, and and through my 20s, mostly I had to land in a poetry class or a workshop. During a lot of that time, I wasn't, but at least once or twice a year, some poem would just squeeze through and I would have to write it.
So it's a feeling that you rush to try to manifest?
The poems, like, yeah, they're scribbled on envelopes and, tire warranties from the glove compartment. Yeah.
That's how it is.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear more about, your journeys in the healthcare industry. So how did you get from, the sort of the birth business into hospice care?
Well, I really want to thank a woman named June Whitson. She was British born and was a midwife in California. She was involved with the home birth movement and supporting lay midwives, but she might have been a nurse midwife herself. But I went to this, home birth midwife, very hippie-ish conference at an ashram outside of Santa Cruz. And she gave a little talk on the connection between hospice work and midwifery work. And she talked about the handy woman tradition in like colonial America, or maybe even in England, that the women who attended births were the ones who also did the laying out of the dead. And she was dealing with breast cancer herself. She actually died only a few years after that, I believe. And her husband had died not too long before that. And so she said, I was just sitting in a large group of young women listening to her, but she was basically telling us to keep our eye out for hospice work and that there might be a role for us. And then a few months later, at my home health agency, they asked for a volunteer to do hospice night call. So I raised my hand because she had told me to.
So professionally, then it didn't seem like that hard a step.
Well, it was interesting going from my intended career as a home birth midwife to then a home death midwife, basically. Mm-hmm. It gets back to that theme of working against the institution or within the institution. It just so happened at that time, 1996, Medicare had established the hospice Medicare benefit, within the previous 10 years. And so Medicare was paying us to support people in home death. And instead of worrying about liability, because in home birth midwifery or any midwifery, we're worried about the baby dying. We're worried about the mother dying. And in hospice, the person is supposed to die. So it's just this tremendous relief. And
right. What could go wrong?
And our success rate was like really high, and we're getting paid by Medicare to do this. And instead of like being on call, living like a nun, like the home birth midwives do, being on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 300 and some days a year. I was part of a large institution. So I took call, I did night call for 7 days and then I was off for 7 days. So I had time to myself to take care of myself during my pregnancy, which I'd seen a lot of midwives not be able to do. And then I was able to take leave and I got disability when my son was born. And, I ended up taking a year off. And again, I don't see a lot of midwives don't have that luxury. So it was kind of ironic. By switching from birth to death, I was able to take care of myself through my own birth of my son.
Well, good. Otherwise might not have gotten the signal. And how about the way you connected to the work emotionally, or,
Well, and there I do have to credit, it's actually the lead home birth midwife that I trained with. Her name is Dev Karen Kalsa, and I've recently reunited with her and got to visit her in Austin. If you need a place to stay in Austin, the Park Lane Guest House is the place you want to stay. That's where Dave Karen and her partner
Not
Shakti.
Not yet a sponsor of When Humanists Attack.
Dave Karen and Shakti run it, and it's amazing bed and breakfast like you wouldn't believe. But anyway, I feel that I'm still apprenticing to Dave Karen, even though it's 30 years later. She was the home birth midwife who practiced in the way that I dreamed somebody could do, and was so kind and gentle, and also but forceful with me as an apprentice and what I needed to learn. And then when I left Connecticut, she moved to Austin around that time and trained in the Avatar work. Harry Palmer was the founder of it. And it was kind of similar to est or forum. It's this intensive work looking at your own belief structures. And I got a lot of training in being present. It was like kind of like almost a way to do Buddhism without having to sit on a mountaintop and meditate or whatever, which later I ended up doing. But I was trained to be present with myself and other people. And so that first night on call with hospice, I'd had 45 minutes of training from my supervisor. This is what you do at a death. I showed up knowing nothing with my little checklist on my little steno pocket pad. And I kept having to call the other phone nurse on call to ask her what to do. But the family was so appreciative. They kept saying, we couldn't have handled this without you. And the only thing I really brought to that was that I was present. I was present with them and myself. I was present in my own lack of knowledge about the situation. And I was present with them as they didn't know what to do either. And so that was a great gift, because so often when we're working, we're in situations that we have knowledge about. And so we think it's our knowledge that is what's valuable. And I'm not saying knowledge can't be valuable, but that first night doing hospice call, knowing nothing except how to be present, was a great feedback for me in the value of that training I'd had through the avatar work.
That's a beautiful story. It was the right skill. It was enough.
It was all that was needed, and it was exactly what was needed. Yeah.
And I'm guessing it may also have helped your ability to sort of have takeaways yourself from all these encounters with dying people and family.
That's interesting. Yeah, I guess you're right. There's some reflectiveness built in that avatar work. We're looking at how our beliefs create our reality. So you're right. We spend a lot of time observing our beliefs and observing our reality, which I wouldn't have done before. Thanks for pointing that out.
I'll pop in just to point out that this podcast is produced by The Humanist Being, a social change organization classified by the IRS as a religious nonprofit. We're on the web at thehumanistbeing.org, and we've got 2 groups on Meetup in Burlington, Vermont and Brooklyn, New York. Joining either group gives you access to our Zoom-based street epistemology practice group, the Impossible Conversations Club, among other humanistic events both online and on the material plane. If you're just joining us, this is When Humanists Attack. My name is Roger Kimmel Smith, and I have the delight of interviewing Barbara West, a writer and nurse across the lifespan. And, my idea for interviewing you is that, your range of experience nursing from birth to death, up close with both of those, and the rest of your life experience, that you developed some wisdom about the body and the life cycle and its stages. And those are the sorts of things that, are typically the province of religions with their rites of passage, but secular people desperately need that wisdom too. And who else but the handy woman to possess it,
Oh, thank you, Roger. Thank you. And I just have to say, I again am appreciating the title of this show. And I just want to say, When Humanists Attack. But
that's the idea. That's why there's 3 exclamation points.
Exactly. I want to read this little quote from Yunus Emre.
Mm-hmm.
It's excerpted from The Drop That Became the Sea, lyric poems by Yunus Emre, E-M-R-E, who I don't know hardly anything about. But it says, we entered the house of realization. We witnessed the body. The whirling skies, the many-layered earth, the 70,000 veils we found in the body, the night and the day, the planets, the words inscribed in the holy tablets. Truth is wherever you want it. We found it all within the body.
Yep.
And I don't know, like I said, I don't know really anything about that, except it just like popped up on my computer screen one day when I needed it. And so I put it in the forward to my book, to remind myself more than anything else.
Well, you don't need to reach far to find related ideas in your words.
Well, and the thing is, I perpetually wonder why I'm working with the body rather than saving the world. And this I come back to this quote as my what's the word for it? Like the thing that lets you off the hook. The thing that you're
Your alibi.
alibi. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
As if you need one. Well, I mean, the relationship between the body and the self, is probably closer than any of the other, sort of dimensions of selfhood we've set up. The Hindus, said that thou art, the body and the world. I know is a metaphor richly used by many.
And I think, you point out that I've worked in birth and death, and I think maybe that's very convenient, because those are two moments where it's real obvious that we're embodied or fail to be embodied or whatever. And so I've been aware that those two moments of birth and death draw one into the present, especially like home birth and home death. There's a sense of like, we are all right here in this moment. And I think that's why we watch, football games and basketball games, or those are times where everyone is focused on that moment. And instead of doing that, I've attended births and deaths. But yeah, when we get down to this moment, then we find ourselves in a body.
I mean, those are the rites of passage. They're the only two that are noted on a gravestone, for example. Those are the times when there's negotiation between life and what is not human life.
Yeah, and I guess I don't want to violate any when humanists attack rules, but if we talk about body and spirit, those are the points of connection and disconnection, possibly between the two, and so whether there's anything before or after we come in or out of the world, that the details of that don't concern me, but it's fun to feel the mystery of that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the presence of that. That's what's going on, and it's there's an authority around it. There's a realness.
Yeah.
Well, I know there are at least two other major influences on your life that we haven't really discussed yet. And one you mentioned was Buddhism and meditation, and the other is 12-step recovery groups. Maybe let's address these either together or one at a time.
Yeah. Like I say, I often say I feel I'm living my life at the intersection of like Buddhism, Christianity, and 12-step work, and the shorthand for that is Buddhism and Christianity tend to tell me to help other people, and my 12-step work tells me to focus on myself and stop bothering everybody else. But
really, isn't I mean, well, maybe you're supposed to bother the higher powers, right? Isn't that how the 12-step
in
works?
12-step, well, the higher power doesn't get bothered by us. That's the nice thing.
But you have to admit you need the help.
Right. And that's the thing. It's just, from a humanist point of view, you all might appreciate the work of Kevin Griffin, who's an amazing Buddhist teacher, but he tackles the higher power issue from the point of view of being in a non-theistic religion, and how do you do 12-step work in that context. And what it comes down to, as he so graciously says, is like, it doesn't really matter what it is that's helping, as long as you realize it's not you. Like you can't do it on your own, and that we don't have enough spiritual bootstraps to pull ourselves up on. But it doesn't have to be any kind of supernatural God. I come around a lot to the concept of prayer. I pray a lot, prayers that I've memorized, but in the end, I always felt awkward as a Buddhist doing all these kind of more traditional Judeo-Christian prayers. But in the end, it's just that I'm asking for help. I'm admitting I need help in any way. And that's a spiritual act, I think.
Yeah. I mean, like the thing maybe can be both yourself and not yourself, but you're not doing it separately. There's no separate self, right? That makes it conversant with that rubric.
Yeah. I mean, and maybe because you're right, like when
The
I
separation
pray,
is the big Western,
right,
bugaboo. Right.
right. And so maybe when we say like we're asking for help, we're getting down to fundamentally, I don't know, just admitting we don't know, maybe that's even the core nugget within there. And
Yeah.
and I guess the most important thing to not know is that we don't know what's going to happen next. And that's in Buddhism, we call that groundlessness. And I've come across it. I came across it in Mennonite church services this last couple of months during Lent. They called it wilderness.
Wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
A kind of wilderness of the mind space.
Well, or the wilderness of not knowing what's going to come next and fully giving yourself to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what the humanist translation for that is, but I'm sure there is one.
I'm getting it. It's there. I mean, so I guess this takes us to Barbara at midlife. And the way you've portrayed it to me is that along the way, sometime in your 40s, I guess, you kind of got back to writing. You found that you had a lot that you were now burning to say, and this writer identity erupted.
Yeah, I can tell you exactly how that happened. So, whenever I've been in a poetry workshop or had writing assignments of some kind, I could do them and I would enjoy them by and large. But left to my own devices, I just like turn up with a poem or two a year. But what happened was my mother, who is not a fan of poetry, had on her dining room table where I was sitting to try to do my taxes one February, an announcement that a friend of hers was going to be giving a poetry reading at the Unitarian Church. And I was like, Mom, we got to go. Carlina is doing a reading. This is Carlina White, who's an amazing, amazing poet. And Mom's like, well, I don't like poetry, so I'm not going to go. I was like, well, I have to go then. So I went to this poetry reading. I knew there was going to be an open mic afterwards. So I brought some little 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, trembling in my hands. And I went to this reading that was amazing. I had thought I was too old to get back to seriously writing poetry. And most people that were there were 20, 30, 40, 50 years older than me. So I was in my 40s, and these people were a lot in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and one guy was over 100. They were incredible poets. And that's also the sexiest poetry reading I've ever been to. That series, like it's hot. Like they know how to write. And so I started showing up every month with a piece of paper shaking in my hands. And so that gave me a clue that I needed to do something about this writing thing. And that's,
goodness.
So I'm grateful to that.
Well, we know sex sells, but I didn't know that sex sells poetry.
Apparently it does, or at least it makes you show up with a trembling piece of paper, at least.
Wow. All right.
And so then I started going to poetry readings, and then I started getting invited to feature. And then, there happened to be a publisher, the piece of paper shaking in your hands. There's something you want to share.
Well, you've always been comfortable with performing as long as I've known you. So I'm sure it was a natural step for you to become a very dynamic kind of performance poet.
I love to perform, and in an upper class, white, wealthy poetry context, my performance poetry kind of made a splash, in a different context. There's plenty of people that are awesome at that, but I was one of the few people that was not holding a piece of paper in front of their face and staring down at it,
I see. You were a little freer than your average pink female.
Well, and basically I memorized my poems, and it's so fun to look at an audience when you're performing, and a lot of the poets in these circles don't know that. But so that's been interesting to me these last couple years. I kind of know how to deliver a poem with my body and my voice.
Right.
But now learning how to make it deliver on the paper without my body and voice is a whole new skill that I've had to learn. Without
the body and voice. All
yeah.
Right, well, that's interesting. I mean, that suggests maybe something about your process. I mean, certainly, literally, I guess you're saying that the creation and the delivery of the poem are separate acts.
Yeah, but maybe not. I mean, maybe before I was always writing like how I speak. And then now that I'm, writing stuff that's unperformable, I mean, maybe simply because of its length, I'm having to learn like how to use punctuation and like phrases and like how to have tension in my writing, which I was able to maintain, I mean, for one, poems are shorter, so you don't have as much need to pull an audience through, but I'm having to learn to make the words on the page communicate what my body and voice used to help the words do.
Well, before we get to that, I'm getting antsy to hear one of these works
Okay,
or
let's
more.
see. Okay, let's see. I this one I wrote a few years back, but I'm fond of it. So let's see. Well, actually, I'm just going to read this one first. It's short. It's called Silver Badge. And it kind of gets back to like nonviolent communication and Marshall Rosenberg, how even when we mean well and we are humanists and we're actually not attacking for a single moment, it's maybe hard for other people to believe that.
Right, we're that little puppet.
Yeah, there's the giraffes and the jackals, and might be interpreted the wrong way. So we think, Silver Badge. Let me polish my silver badge so you will know it is really me. Like how once upon a time, the Wild West sheriff was always the good guy. Accept this talisman, this calling card of the divine, free of tarnish from my human failings, the 5 silver points arrowing out into space, defining a plane of benevolence, so that I no longer have to lie face down on the kitchen floor at your feet to prove I mean no harm. And speaking of doing no harm, that's what they say in medicine. Oh, do no harm. But that's easy to do. I mean, when have you lived a day without doing harm? You know, I mean, gardening is like the most violent thing. You're killing all these little worms and just by putting a shovel in the ground, and you might be using herbicides or throwing slugs to the chickens.
Right. Well, you know, I mean, I think the concept of ahimsa and the, you know, and whatever it was that Hippocrates was learning, different contexts.
Yeah. Tell me more about ahimsa. I know I've come across it, but I need to be reminded.
Oh, I mean, I think that's the idea. The Hindu concept of do no harm is, you know, to anything sentient.
Yeah. So
that's too much for us.
If I pull that off on any day, let me know.
Right, but the trickier thing is to admit the harm you're doing. That that's what most of us don't want to do.
I'll take that. I'm going to take that as a win. That may I admit the harm I do every day. Like I like that prayer. I'm writing that down.
Oh dear.
May I admit
right now I'm authoring prayers on the fly.
May I admit the harm I daily do. And see, I'm asking for help because I know I need help with that. Okay, now I'm going to read this. Speaking of doing no harm, this is I wrote this when I was on retreat at it's actually a tree farm that is like a Buddhist retreat place, privately owned by this wonderful couple. They do Buddhist retreats and some music retreats, but they were letting me go there to do writing retreats in this little cabin. It's a working tree farm in Mendocino County. What sustainability sounds like. What sustainability sounds like. The opposite of raping the landscape isn't not to touch it. It's being part of it. Stepping into your role as predator, harvester, or prey, as the case may be. Our tools have evolved from digging stick and rush woven basket to chainsaw and extended cab pickup. At the moment, we don't have the luxury of a team of well-trained Clydesdales. The sound of chainsaws in the distance, trees dropping, is the sound of nature unfolding. This is what sustainability sounds like: financial, physical, environmental, emotional. This is the sound of Dharma, what is. There are some places designated for pristine, where humans' role is strictly to walk single file on needle-springing paths, smile up in wonder, then visit the State House to remind those in power. But this is not one of those. It's here because it can pay its keep with tree trunks going out, people coming in, writing, meditating, singing, crying, as the case may be. There's no guarantee another fire won't consume it, as tends to happen once or twice a century. But we prefer not, so we're voting for not with our tiny human votes. A fire extinguisher in the cabin, a glass on the shrine shelf for used matches, checking the barn kitchen stove for all dials turned up to off, clearing underbrush. Lightning may strike. Rats may chew into a hot wire. This place may need to burn. If so, that will be our path. Meanwhile, we all keep voting for what, as my sponsor says, seems to us to be the good, stretching our understanding of that as wide as we can, the way a woman stretches to give birth, or rather, the way she is stretched by the emerging head. Another tree falls away from the blade with an earth-shaking thud. The whoop of the chainsaw-wielding man reassures you he survived this one too.
That's fabulous. I mean, I had two thoughts while hearing that. One was that it certainly sounded like a piece of California poetry from the last 18 or 24 months.
Yeah. I mean, I think I wrote it 5 years ago, but yeah, it was before the fires started burning, but the fires were just the history there of the land. I saw the old stumps from 70 years ago that had been burned.
Yeah. And the other association was with a pair of words that we tossed about between us 30 years ago, non-dual ecology.
Well, and that's where I have to say you saved my life.
What?
I mean, because we never save a life, we're only prolonging it, really, but because we're all going to still die eventually. But
our idea of the good is that it continue.
Yeah, I like being alive, and I'm fond of being alive today. And until you sent me Non-Dual Ecology by John McClellan from Tricycle, and I carry copies of it with me. I have multiple copies since I'm prone to losing things. I pass them out to people. I even did a workshop on it at church camp.
Oh, wow.
It's the first one that told me that my idea of the good may not be the cosmic eternal good. And it's okay for me to fight for my idea of the good, but I don't have to be angry about it. And I can learn to act not out of rage. And that, if we annihilate ourselves as a species, that may not be the worst thing for the cosmos, and I had just never had that much room before. And it was, I think, the first thing I ever read that gave me permission to just work on being happy.
So there it is again, some slack and some permission.
Yeah, it gave me slack. Yeah, because I could.
It's Roger's gift to Barbara there, for the record.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. Yeah, you Xeroxed it out for all of us in that zine, but it had never occurred to me that I didn't have to be in a rage every day, and I didn't have to be terrified every day about what was going to happen to myself and everybody else, most particularly everybody else. I could actually just relax in the fear of being terrified about what's going to happen to me, and that's a huge relief right there.
Well, from some of the hints that you've given, this basic question about, yourself and everybody else is at the heart of the writing that you're doing now, right? You've described the project on your website as a memoir of recovery from codependency, both personal and familial.
Oh, right. Yeah. So our job as a family was to save the world. I mean, it still is. And thanks to Non-Dual Ecology by John McClellan, mailed to me in the mail by Roger Smith, I came to entertain the idea that it wasn't necessarily my job to save the world. And so I'm working on that very particularly right now. I'm reading every letter that my father ever wrote me. And my father was working to he went into his work as a China scholar in hopes of ending the Cold War and healing wounds of war in hopes of preventing future wars, focusing on the Korean War in particular, the last decade or so of his life. And there's some difficult letters in there, as you alluded to. In college, there was a time when I was completely rejected by my father and didn't know if I would ever see him again. And that actually repeated itself a couple times later in my life. And so it's interesting now that it's actually a relief to go ahead and just read all these things he wrote, reread them.
Oh, wow.
Realize that I don't have to feel guilty for the things I hadn't read earlier. And just, my father actually had a fair amount of insight into his own pain and the things that caused him to lash out, even if he couldn't control it. He writes about it pretty eloquently. And he's a historian. And so, he's reminding me why it's worth it to dig around and look at the painful things.
What was he rejecting in you?
Fundamentally that I hurt him, that who I was hurt who he was. And that's a theme that played out in his life with many different people and has to do with my parents' divorce,
Mm-hmm.
But, I'm learning as I get older, when someone has been hurt by the majority of people in their lives, it may not be that it was my fault as a young child. And it may be that I was good when I was a child. And even when I was a teenager, and even when I was in my 20s, that possibility is rearing its head here. And I can see how much my father also saw that and spoke to that. So it's interesting to have him now as an ally in this project.
Yes, at last. Right.
Yeah.
That sounds like a real full circle harvest for you.
Yeah. And people dying can often be helpful in these kinds of conversations. And we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of his death. So I'm making progress in that relationship, partly thanks to those events.
And so, the substance of that as it plays out, has to do with this other phrase that you wrote to summarize the writing you're doing. Having been raised to save the world, she learns to save herself.
Yeah. And again, and what save means, we don't really know, because we're going to have a non-dual approach to that, but we're at least learning to, cherish the self, or be gentle towards the self, or not punish the self, not punish myself. And that's kind of exciting.
Yeah, that gets you out from under some punitive styles, some punitive legacies.
Legacy is a really good word. And I think, when your job and your family's job is to save the world, it makes sense that you would be failing to measure up, over 300 years or more. And it also helps, I guess as a result of all this different work, I'm learning to find friends who don't punish me, and connect with family members who don't punish me or avoid punishing situations, and that really helps you let go of the self-punishing habit. Yeah.
Got something else to read on this kind of theme?
Let's see. All right, let's try this. Flinging pork chop. This is also written at from the same retreat center out on the tree farm in Mendocino County. Flinging pork chop. Taking a break from the cabin, it's lunchtime anyway, eating leftover pork chop in the old metal chair on the pond dock. The pond is teeming with life, more than I even thought. Bullfrog tadpoles float everywhere, catch sun in the shallows until my footfalls wiggle them off. They settle again mid-pond, belly resting on a reed like no-necked gymnasts on a horizontal bar poised for the next twirl. Mosquito fish are swarming from a hulky 1.5 inches down to one so tiny that even when they furiously lash their tails, their forward progress remains laughable. I think about throwing in a piece of my pork chop, a tiny, tiny little shred. I think of the pork oil contaminating the water. I think of delicate ecosystem balances and how humans so often unwittingly tilt them toward disaster. How we learned years later that the stale bread Grandma West saved for us to feed the ducks turned to cement in their bellies. But then I think of all the crazy stuff that might just happen to fall into the pond anyway. So I tear a bit of my pork chop off the bone and throw. The mosquito fish are on it. The shred of meat is like a massive beach ball in a new games class, but this is no new game. They are dead set on winning. They've pulled it into two pieces now, the battle now raging on two fronts. The biggest mosquito fish with the biggest piece is leaping out of the water, heavy prize in its mouth. Others maintain hot pursuit until all are lost from my sight. That was fun. I think about doing it again. I think about the ecosystem and how artificial inputs falsely stimulate population growth so that when the external stimulus is withdrawn, surplus populations wither in famine, disease weakens the strength of the original herd. I think about how one of the fish could get hurt in the fray, how hungry dogs fighting over a bone come away wounded, but I'm bored and I'm lonely. I toss in another bit, results as satisfying as previous. I think about other things that might fall in the water. They wouldn't stand a chance against these micro piranhas. Then I see the body of a small electric blue dragonfly floating past the dock, surprisingly dry, as if it just fell in. Why aren't the fish after it? Too bad it's already dead. My lust for blood sport rising up from primal depths of my being, from some time before 300 years ago when my family became pacifists. Maybe that's why we needed a religion that strict. Were we extra bloodthirsty to begin with? If the dragonfly would wiggle a bit, those fish would be all over it. Then it does. The fish don't miss a beat. They have it surrounded on all sides, pulling on it as if it were a piece of pork chop. The melee floats sideways across a dry reed on the surface. The dragonfly gets traction and lifts its wings in the air in a last-ditch attempt to save its own life. The fish leap at its feet like angry dogs, jerking it into the lethal wet, that dark place where creatures of the air have no advantage, where the minnow hounds of hell reign in savage discord. I wonder how different I am than the guys who put down money on razor spur roosters, or those who breed pit bulls for fighting. My contempt for those who are vulgar, ordinary, is being dismantled bit by bit, carried off like so much pork chop. I see now that we all want a front row seat on the horror and glory of death. Apparently, it's part of what makes me able to drive into work every day and why the rest of my family members watch movies, sports, or politics. A week in a solitary cabin would put any of us into withdrawal. Then someone, God perhaps, has mercy on my soul, and the whole messy fray drifts under the deck out of sight. I'm contentedly heavy enough, leftover pork chop in my lap, to not get up and lean my head over the edge. I still have my limits, apparently.
Oh, wow. Barbara West, flinging pork chop.
Thank you, Roger. It's fun to do these out loud. I don't think I've really ever read them out to anybody. So thank you.
Well, I mean, you sent that one to me and I read it, but I didn't hear in my own head, that sports casting passage or two that really sold it.
Well, that's the thing. I do say on my Facebook profile, color commentary in general. I think it's a phrase Jed came up with, but I do see myself as color commentary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and I'm secretly still a game show host.
That's what's going on here. Where's my prize?
Oh, Barbara West, what a richness there is in our conversation and in your world and in your work. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Roger. And thanks for helping me remember, like, what the heck am I doing here anyway? It's just amazing to get this kind of support over this many decades. And also, when I say support from you, I don't just mean like the personal support, but it soothes me knowing that somebody is keeping track, someone's watching the media, someone is writing about that, and speaking about that. So and hosting these conversations. So thank you so much.
And a little postscript. The conversation you just heard occurred in 2022. In mid-2023, Barbara announced that she was shelving the memoir she'd been writing and joining a new 12-step program, Workaholics Anonymous this time. At present, she's still nursing and teaching swimming lessons at the city pool in Corvallis, Oregon, and practicing her pole dancing, but perhaps most intensively, she's working very hard at not working very hard. Our theme music is Pod Men from Sector 7 by Eric Bode. This is Roger Kimmel Smith reminding you to stay alert, skeptical, rational, and loving, for you can't predict when humanists attack.